Hello and welcome back to another episode of Handloader TV. I'm your host, Jeremiah. In this episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive and doing a full load development on the 22 Nosler cartridge using this Nosler M48 bolt action rifle we have before us today. Now, before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the rifle itself and hand loading, I want to take a brief moment and talk to you about my personal experience with the 22 Nosler and this rifle. I've been working with this cartridge and rifle combination for about 8 years now, since the introduction of the 22 Nosler. This particular rifle is in the low 700s on the serial number, so it's a relatively early production rifle. And as a result, I've had many years to kind of refine my loading process and understanding of the cartridge itself. So I've taken this rifle out on horseback numerous times. I've hunted in the field with it more times than I can remember. I've gone on long hikes through the woods and prairies with this rifle. And overall, it's been a fantastic rifle. Great on coyotes, great on prairie dogs. It's just an all-around wonderful varmint cartridge. And the rifle itself performs very well, in addition to looking very nice. And if we have some time, we'll throw in some photos of this rifle up on a recent Wyoming prairie dog hunt. It performed very well, one of the more accurate rifles I had up there, and I was consistently making hits out to 500 and 600 yards on prairie dogs with this rifle. So great cartridge, great rifle. Let's go ahead and talk about the rifle first, then we'll dive into some of the hand loading side of things. So let's go ahead and start out talking about this rifle at the back end here. This is a Nosler M48 short action. It is chambered, of course, in 22 Nosler, and it would be their Heritage model, which sadly is now discontinued. And at the time of this filming, Nosler is not offering any of their rifles chambered in 22 Nosler. I think it's kind of sad that that's happened, but we'll dive into that a little bit more before we talk into the hand loading. But for now, this rifle has a nice black line rubber recoil pad. Looks like maybe a Pachmayr decelerator, but it's a Nosler branded recoil pad. Very nice walnut wood stock, good grain structure, some nice checkering here at the wrist and fore end. And then we have a very nice Nosler M48 bolt action. Little bit stiff on the cocking, but runs really nice and smooth through that raceway there. 2-position safety. Forward is fire, back is safe, and it still allows you to operate the bolt. Now for the magazine on here, since this is a standard short action for cartridges of about 2.800 inches in overall length, it does have a small block in the back of this magazine, which just from a use perspective over the years, it can make it a little bit more tricky to feed rounds into the magazine, but once you get used to it, works perfectly fine. And that does also provide some limitations on your cartridge overall loaded length, but in my experience, I'm always able to touch the lands even with lighter 55 grain bullets if so desired. So it works out really nice in this rifle and cartridge combination. And then we have a 24-inch barrel, which is 1 1/8 twist. And we have, to top it all off, a Leupold VX5 HD. This is a 3-15 by 44 millimeter optic. It features their CDS ZL2 locking turrets, and it has a very nice Christmas tree reticle in there, and I believe there's 12 MOA worth of windage in that reticle and 28 MOA worth of elevation, which is really advantageous when you're sitting on a bench popping prairie dogs at extended ranges. All in all, a very nice rifle. The trigger on this, on an average of 5 pulls on a Wheeler Engineering trigger pull gauge, this is their digital version, it broke at 2 pounds 3 ounces, so very clean, very crisp, no over travel. All in all, a phenomenal trigger, and to be honest with you, I did go in there and hone it out. I can't remember what it came from the factory, but it was still pretty light. I think I took maybe a pound off there if memory serves me correct, but don't quote me on that. So all in all, I've had this rifle in the field a ton. It's very familiar to me. It does have sling studs fore and aft, so you can sling it up or mount a bipod on it, things of that nature. The accuracy so far has been stellar. At the time of this filming, I want to say there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 rounds through the barrel, and no signs of accuracy degradation so far. But we're going to run through a full load development, and we'll see what kind of accuracy and performance the 22 Nosler is truly capable of. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the cartridge, and then we'll segue right into hand loading and tell you everything you need to know about hand loading this cartridge, because there are some little things and nuances that you should be aware of. So in talking about the 22 Nosler as a cartridge itself, I want to discuss why it's here and some of the advantages and perhaps even disadvantages to the cartridge. Originally, I think it set out to solve a common goal to gain more performance than the 223 Remington or 5.56 NATO, while still fitting into that 2.260 cartridge overall loaded length, meaning it can function in an AR-15 or a mini action bolt rifle or a short action bolt rifle such as we have here. And I think it's a great accomplishment because the 22 Nosler does indeed outperform the 223 Remington and the 5.56 NATO. It's a great little cartridge. It has a little bit faster twist rate of 1 in 8 than some of the older 223 Remingtons out there, so it can stabilize long, heavy, high BC bullets, which is a trend we see in the industry. But also, it does increase your velocity, and as a result of those higher BC bullets, you have less drop down range and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, velocity is a huge part of your energy factor and also your bullet drop as well. So you're squeezing just a little bit more performance than your typical 223 Remington 5.56 NATO cartridge with the 22 Nosler. It does utilize a rebated rim on the cartridge, so it can function with your standard AR-15 bolt faces. You don't have to swap the bolts. All you need is a simple barrel swap, and you can shoot 22 Nosler through your AR-15, which is really, really interesting and very neat in my opinion. It's a good cartridge as far as varmints and things of that nature go. I also think it could be used on smaller deer-sized game, Coues whitetail and eastern whitetail, and perhaps even some western mule deer with proper shot placement, of course, always being the caveat when we're talking about hunting. But all in all, I think it's a good cartridge that really didn't get off the ground or get the recognition that it probably should have out the gate. Personally speaking, and this is just my personal opinion, I do prefer the 22 Nosler over the 224 Valkyrie. I think it's an easier swap. I think it's a little easier to load for and a lot less finicky than the 224 Valkyrie. So on that note, now that you know a little bit more about the cartridge, let's go ahead and walk you through hand loading for this cartridge. Now, Nosler does offer some excellent factory ammunition, but as always, we're Handloader TV, and we like to roll our own. So the first thing that I went ahead and did was line up and select components for this video. We went ahead and selected brand new unfired Nosler cases for demonstration purposes. I do have some once fired Nosler cases here that we're going to walk you through the steps, but we used unfired, brand new, fresh Nosler cases. All I did was run them through a Redding neck sizing die to iron out any dings or dents in there. Very simple operation there. Screw the die down until it contacts the shell holder, run it up into that die, and then you have clean, uniform cases. Then we went ahead and selected some high quality bullets and powders as well as primers. For all the testing that we're going to be doing, we use Federal 205 gold medal match primers. In my experience, they're wonderful, wonderful primers and very reliable and consistent ignition source. So now, once all of the cases were neck sized to set uniform neck tension, I went ahead and chamfered and deburred all the cases, and then I went ahead and seated some primers using a Frankfurt Arsenal hand priming tool. I like that tool. It offers a depth adjustment and very easy to use. Then the next step was to go ahead and charge the cases. For that, I used an RCBS Matchmaster powder dispenser. All charges were accurate to 0.04 of a grain. And from there, it was time to seat the various bullets to the correct overall loaded length. And that just simply entailed installing our sizing die and running them up in there, getting that as straight as possible. As always, I do believe that bullet runout can affect accuracy, so I try and seat those bullets as uniformly and as concentrically as possible, and Redding dies are very, very good at that. So we use some top-notch components, top-notch powders, bullets, and dies to assemble all of our hand loads here. Now we're going to take some preloaded ammunition that we've already loaded up, and we're going to go hit the range and see what kind of performance this rifle is capable of, and we'll also shoot some factory ammunition as well. So what do you say we go ahead and hit the range and have some fun shooting some targets? So we're at the range now. We've got the 22 Nosler here benched in, targets downrange at 100 yards. Got a Garmin Zero chronograph here set up to record all of our muzzle velocities. And according to the Kestrel 5700 here, we've got a little bit of a tailwind coming from about the 4 to 5 o'clock position, between 2 to 6 miles an hour, give or take. And the temperature is 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity is 14.7%, and pressure when adjusted for elevation, which is 5,000 feet, is 30.37 in Hg. So let's go ahead and get settled in, and we'll start out by shooting some hand loads through this rifle. So first up, we're going to be putting to the test Hodgdon CFE 223 powder, a 33.0 grain charge with a 55 grain Norma tip strike bullet, Federal 205M primers, Nosler cases, and our overall loaded length is 2.255 inches. I'm a big fan of CFE 223 in the 22 Nosler. I think it's about ideal for that. I think it also works great in the 22 Arc. So I'm pretty curious to see how it does here. And that Norma tip strike bullet, Norma components in general, are difficult to get here in the US, but I've had good success with them, and they're very popular with our shooters and hand loaders abroad. So enough talk, let's shoot a group. Well, near as I can tell, that's a pretty good group, and I'm pretty happy with that so far. Not too shabby. That brass was hot. Whew. So this next load is using Hodgdon H4895 powder, a 26.5 grain charge with a 77 grain Berger OTM bullet, Nosler cases, Federal 205M primers, and our overall loaded length is 2.255 inches. I've had great success with this bullet in my AR-15 chambered in 22 Nosler. So let's go ahead and see how it does in the bolt gun. Rolling right along with our load development, we've swapped over to Shooter's World Precision Powder. This is a 26.5 grain charge with the 75 grain Hornady boat tail hollow point bullet, Nosler cases, Federal 205M primers, and our overall loaded length is 2.255 inches. This powder is very comparable to Hodgdon Varget. For those looking for alternative powder options, this is an excellent choice. Let's go ahead and put a little tiny group on the paper if we can. Not too shabby. I will take that. So we're shifting gears here over to Alliant Reloader 15.5 powder, a 27 grain charge with the 85 grain Nosler RDF bullet, Nosler cases, Federal 205M primers, and our overall loaded length is 2.255 inches. I'm going to go ahead and throw my ears on, because I like to wear ears and plugs if I'm not shooting suppressed. And let's settle in and shoot a group. So we've gone ahead and swapped over now to Nosler match grade ammunition. This is their RDF ammunition using the 85 grain Nosler RDF. Let's go ahead and put a group on the paper and see how this rifle shoots with some factory loads compared to our hand loads. Cold bore flew a little bit further right than I'd appreciate, but let's see what happens. Stack them in there, not too shabby for factory ammunition. I'm pretty happy with that. So we're back from the range now after shooting a ton of different loads through this rifle. And as always, before we go any further, if you want to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, all the results we got, raw and unfiltered, in this particular rifle, head on over to loaddata.com and type in Handloader TV into the search bar and look for the 22 Nosler loads in this bolt action rifle, because we present all the information for you there. the largest group size to the smallest group size, standard deviations, velocities, all that good stuff. The only thing we don't show is the powder charge. We reserve that for our subscribers, but it's a great way to help support us, what we're doing, our testing, as well as Handloader TV as a whole. So now we're going to dive in and look at the best results that we got in this particular rifle and showcase them to you. And across the board with this rifle, we got really, really good results. I'm excited about that and very pleased. In particular, because it's not very often that you have a rifle you know, you're familiar with, you've been shooting for a long time, and then you run back through about 2,000 rounds later, a full load development on the rifle. And it's nice to see that this rifle is still performing extremely well despite that round count. So taking a look at the first target that we have, we shot some Nosler factory ammunition. This is a Nosler match grade RDF ammunition utilizing the 85 grain Nosler RDF bullet. Standard deviation of 17, extreme spread of 47, and with that 24-inch barrel on this rifle, we got an average velocity of 2,854 feet per second, which is very respectable for that weight of bullet, and a group size of 1.17 inches. So all in all, not too bad for factory ammunition. I'm pretty pleased with those results. And then we went ahead and swapped over to our hand loads, which first up we were using a favorite powder of mine in cartridges of this size, not just the 22 Nosler, but the 22 ARC, 224 Valkyrie, things like that. Hodgdon CFE powder, a 33 grain charge with a 55 grain Norma tip strike varmint bullet. These bullets are relatively hard to get in the US, but for our viewers abroad and European subscribers, this is a very popular and very common bullet over there, and it is a phenomenal bullet. We got a group size of just 0.37 inches with this, a standard deviation of 10, and an extreme spread of 29, and with a very respectable average velocity of 3,615 feet per second. So all in all, very good results there. I'm very pleased with that load, and the performance is off to a good start so far. Then we went ahead and swapped on over to Hodgdon H4895 powder, a 26.5 grain charge with a 77 grain Berger OTM. Now with this powder and bullet combination, we got extremely good results across the board. And again, check load data to see all those. But this particular load grouped into 0.67 inches. And this is a favorite bullet and powder combination in my AR-15 chambered in 22 Nosler, standard deviation of just 7 and an extreme spread of 16 with an average velocity of 2,950 feet per second. Screaming fast, very, very good with a 77 grain bullet, and that 24-inch barrel no doubt helps with that, but also the 22 Nosler is a very high performance cartridge. And even if you don't load for the 22 Nosler itself, a lot of these powders are good in similar sized cases, such as the Valkyrie, the ARC, and things of that nature, 22 Grendel. So you can learn something in reviewing these targets for maybe a different cartridge that is similar. The next load we went ahead and tried is using Shooter's World Precision Rifle powder, a 26.5 grain charge with a 75 grain Hornady boat tail hollow point bullet, standard deviation of 9 and an extreme spread of just 27 with an average velocity of about 2870 there, and a group size of just 0.46 inches. So far, stellar accuracy. This is a great powder. It's very comparable to Varget, Hodgdon Varget. And that 75 grain Hornady boat tail hollow point is a match bullet, but I'll tell you from personal experience, I've taken numerous coyotes with this bullet. The terminal performance on smaller varmints and coyote-sized to prairie dog-sized game is phenomenal. It expands very rapidly, very effectively, and it's a relatively cheap bullet, so if you wanted to perform double duty for shooting local matches, as well as a varmint hunting bullet, this is a phenomenal option, and I'm a big fan of it. Then last but certainly not least, we have the final hand load to talk about, which is using Alliant Reloader 15.5 TS, or temperature stable, a 27 grain charge with an 85 grain Nosler RDF bullet. We get an average velocity of 2,754 feet per second, standard deviation of 10, and a group size of just 0.72 inches. So across the board, all of our hand loads grouped into the sub-MOA category, which is very, very nice to see. And some of these particular powder and bullet combinations that we tested were across 5 different charge weights were all sub MOA. So the rifle is shooting very, very well. And this last load using Alliant Reloader 15.5 is no exception there. That powder has gotten rather difficult to find, but every now and then you can find it on Brownells, Powder Valley, and Graphs. But it is a rather difficult powder to find. However, the other powders should be pretty regularly available. That being said, this is a phenomenal powder in cartridges of this size. It performs very well, and it is extremely temperature stable. So there you have it. There's the results of our hand loads. We'll go ahead and close out this video with a few closing thoughts on the rifle cartridge itself. So as always, we have presented you the information, the loads, and everything you need to know about this cartridge start to finish, and we don't pull any punches with that. And again, if you want to see the good, the bad, and the ugly results from our load development, check out loaddata.com and draw your own conclusions. You decide whether a Nosler M48 is something you'd like to add to your lineup, or if you're interested in the 22 Nosler itself. But I want to close out this video with some of my personal thoughts on the rifle and cartridge combination. Starting out with the rifle, over the years I've had the opportunity to hunt and shoot and handle probably upwards of a dozen Nosler M48 rifles. Phenomenal action. They do a wonderful job, and the company itself makes great products, from their Nosler partition to the ballistic tip to their actions and even their cartridge cases. Great company, and I highly recommend them for anybody who's interested in hand loading or very nice factory semi-custom rifles. Now, as far as the 22 Nosler itself goes, I think it's a wonderful little cartridge. I really enjoyed working with it, and over the last 8 or so years, I've really grown to like it. And I think in a way, the 22 Nosler paved the way for some of the cartridges that are gaining popularity now. The 224 Valkyrie was one. I think it kind of lit a fire under Federal to get that pushed out. And then also later on now, more recently, with Hornady offering the 22 ARC. I think the 22 Nosler has definitely fell behind the shadow of the 22 ARC. However, it was there first, and all in all, it is a pretty good cartridge. Early on, when it came to hand loading and stuff like that, there were some considerations with the brass longevity. I personally have experienced a little bit of that with primer pockets giving out maybe slightly prematurely, but I can tell you with the new Nosler factory-made brass, there are zero issues there. All the primer pockets on this looked great, and there was a bit of a misconception over that to begin with. I think a lot of people were just swapping barrels onto their 223s, 5.56 rifles without doing anything to the gas system or the buffer system. And as a result, I think a lot of those rifles were over-gassed, and that can wreak havoc on your brass life as well, causing burrs around the rebated rim, loosening primer pockets, and all sorts of stuff, mostly because when your rifle, AR-15 gas gun, is over-gassed, then what's happening is that bolt is unlocking prematurely before the pressure drops fully, and it tears up cases. And I think that was a big issue and kind of tarnished the 22 Nosler's reputation to a degree. In a bolt action rifle, I have not experienced that at all. Everything has worked very well. And with my properly tuned AR-15, I've experienced no issues there either. And if there's enough interest out there, I think in the near future we can do something on that AR-15 and kind of talk about 22 Nosler loads in an AR. I think that would be a lot of fun, because all in all, I'm personally a pretty big fan of this cartridge. I've used it a lot in the field. Most recently, I took it up to Wyoming, and that was just a phenomenal time, and this was by far one of my favorite rifles, as well as that AR-15 chambered in 22 Nosler. So there you have it. Those are just my personal thoughts on the rifle and cartridge combination. As always, you be the judge, you decide. But we want to thank you so much for watching this episode. If you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, would like to share your own experience, please leave those in the comments. I do read every single one of those. I don't always have time to respond to them all, but I do read them, and I do my best to listen to you guys. And if you have suggestions for future videos, we're all ears. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're notified when we post our next video. And I will catch you guys in the next episode.